Pesky's Pest Control. Put your bugs on the run. Call 205-470-8161.
Welcome to another episode of Pesky's Pest Control Podcast here in Birmingham, Alabama with Michael and Travis. We do this podcast as a community service for Birmingham, Hoover, Vestavia Hills, Mountain Brook, Helena, Alabaster, Pelham, and all other surrounding areas. Hey, so today I want to talk about powderpost beetles. And if you have ever experienced powderpost beetles, then you know exactly what they do. They leave a fine frass powder on the floor. It's normally white, yellow, and that is the signs of powderpost beetles.
You know, a lot of the crawl spaces that I've inspected in older houses have been prone to having some sort of old identifiers that there were at one time powderpost beetles. And typically, you know, on the floor joist, floor members inside the crawl space, there's gonna be little holes everywhere. But the key thing there is that powder, that identifier that there's activity going on. And that usually looks like like you said, a whitish, yellowish colored powder that's kind of been pushed out of those holes. So it makes almost like a rain down effect on the side of the wood. And that's always usually an indicator that there's activity going on inside of the wood in that crawl space.
Yeah, that's right. And then, you know, a lot of times people freak out about powderpost beetles. Typically, they do not reinfest. So there's really not really a need to just, you know, I'd worry more about termites than I would powderpost beetles because we see it all the time. And if you just see the holes and you don't see any of the powder, then that's old. There's really no need to worry about it.
Yeah, definitely. Although I will say this, you know, I think there's some misconceptions out there from people. I had a customer, this is back probably a year or two ago, that called us because they had an inspection from another company. The other company said, "Hey, we think you got powderpost beetles." And I guess that the other company declined to do the treatment on the house. And of course, this gentleman was very concerned about it and wanted it treated. So he ended up calling us. I went out to inspect the crawl space, and sure enough, there were holes and powder coming out. And the interesting part about this is the wood in question, the wood that was infested, wasn't the old wood underneath the crawl space. It was actually new wood that they had put inside the crawl space that they had recently bought from a big retail store. I'm not going to say any names on a retail chain, but they had just bought it and had it put in, and a couple months later, lo and behold, they've got a powderpost beetle infestation coming out of the wood, and this wood was supposed to have been treated wood.
Well, let's talk about that. So when the wood is brought into the sawmill, it's not infested from the forest or whatever. It's brought into the sawmill, and then that wood is stored. That is when that wood starts to become infested. And they're supposed to go through treatment styles. They're supposed to put a type of boric hair on it, or they're supposed to do a heat treatment. But heat treatments just aren't as effective, and they take forever. I mean, you have to heat wood up for, I think it's 24 hours at 124 to 135 degrees. And that's hard to heat that much lumber, you know, one bundle at a time, I guess you'd say.
Well, and you also, you know, with wood, there's other factors to consider more so than just heat too. You're talking about heat, you're talking about moisture content inside the wood. And like you said, whether or not the wood itself has been treated with some sort of pesticide or borate type substance that's going to, you know, penetrate down inside of that wood and have a long lasting effect. But like I said, I think that there's just a common misconception that, well, if you go to a store or a retailer and you purchase wood, well, it's been treated, so it's good to go, you know. And that's not always the case. You can't always just act under that reassurance that there's not going to ever be a problem.
Right. And then, but the customer you had that they were emerging, I mean, there was no structural damage done to the wood. It was just a couple pinholes that were coming out. So I know you treated it, and typically, like I said, they don't reinfest. Any beetles that are emerging out of that are going to die. So pretty easy to fix.
Yeah. And like I said, if someone has that problem, has that issue in their house with their wood, it's nothing that a borate treatment cannot, go ahead and take care of them. And the other good part about that is these treatments, like I said, with borates, products like Boracare, I guess, or Timbor or one of those products, is that once that wood is treated, I mean, that product absorbs down inside of that wood, and that product is there for a very, very, very long time. And so it's not just effective against things like powderpost beetles or other types of beetles. It is also effective in helping to prevent infestation for things like termites as well.
Yeah, that's right. So I want to talk a little bit too about some miscommunication between people thinking they have powderpost beetles and people thinking that they have, or actually having stored product pest. So I know, a lot of the flower beetles and powderpost beetles can be, you can think you have one and the other.
Yeah, and the other thing that I will say to differentiate is, your powderpost beetles you're going to be less likely to actually see the beetles themselves. Most of the time, they're going to be inside of that wood. They're very rarely are you ever going to actually physically see the beetles themselves. Whereas a confused flower beetle or other type of stored product pest, that crawls around, a lot of people will have a misconception that weevils are beetles too, or some type of beetle. So you're usually going to see these pests. I've had a customer that had some confused flower beetles at one time. These things were everywhere. When I tell you the room that had them, they were crawling all over the counters. They were just everywhere. And actually they had bought these like wicker, some type of scent, of material baskets from a home decor store. And then they put these baskets in their house, and then all of a sudden they've got confused flower beetles everywhere. So it's kind of interesting. But like I said, typically with the powderpost beetles, you just don't physically see the beetles very often at all.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, they're not going to pupa. They don't have a pupa either, so you're not going to see that little cocoon up in the corner of the pantry or anything like that. Also, the powderpost beetles, they come out at night, so that's another reason you don't see the beetle. Thank you for listening to the Pesky's Pest Control podcast here in Birmingham, Alabama with Michael and Travis. If you have any questions about what we've discussed today, please give us a call at 205-470-8161 and ask for me, Michael Wienecke. I'll be happy to speak with you anytime. And don't forget to share this podcast with your friends and subscribe to us on Apple, Amazon, Google, and Spotify. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Google Pesky's Pest Control. Put your bugs on the run. Call 205-470-8161.